But for those of us who are here, welcome. My name is Dr. Christina Bache. I am chair of our working group, and I'm also a research affiliate with Queen's University and an adjunct faculty member at the Brussels School of Governance. Thank you for joining our webinar today, which will focus on furthering the discussion on the intersectionality of business, peace building, and human rights. We have two colleagues from the US Institute for Peace, Dr. Elie Abouaoun and Nate Wilson, who will present their work, which focuses on the Middle East and North Africa, including Libya. So before I introduce them, I'd like to turn the virtual microphone over to Dr. Louisa Murphy, who will tell us about PRIME, the Principles for Responsible Management Education, which is the umbrella initiative that our working group is situated within. So Louisa, if I could turn it over to you.
Super. Thank you so much, Christina, for the very warm welcome and greetings to all of you, whatever time of day it might be for you. I know we're all experiencing different time zones with Zoom, but that's the beauty of it all. So it's great to have you all joining us from all over the world. I saw that we had participants from Mexico and Tunisia and Jordan, Iraq, Switzerland, the US, Egypt, Canada, the list goes on. So it's a pleasure to have you here with us for what should be a really exciting webinar. I'll tell you a little bit about PRIME, the Principles for Responsible Management Education. I am a coordinator at PRIME, and I oversee our working groups as well as our partnerships and fundraising, and are sharing information on progress reports. So I'm your contact point for those different areas, but of course, if you have any questions about PRIME in general, I'm happy to answer them. For those of you unfamiliar with PRIME, I'll just provide you with a brief background. The initiative was established in 2007 by an international task force of deans, university presidents, and different academic institutions. As you might guess with our name, we are a United Nations sponsored initiative, and we are a sister initiative of the United Nations Global Compact, the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world. We were created in the spirit of, if you want to change business, you need to teach business differently. So therefore, we serve as a platform to raise the sustainability profile of business schools around the world. To do this, we work through 6 principles to equip our future business leaders with the skills they need to address the Sustainable Development Goals, and also by, of course, aligning with the United Nations Global Compact and the 10 principles. To give you an idea in numbers of our reach, we're proud to say that we have 870 signatories. We hope to, or we anticipate having around 1,000 business schools that are part of PRIME in the new year. And we operate currently in 95 countries. We have 16 active regional chapters comprised of different academic institutions. And last but not least, we have 9 working groups. The PRIME working groups are part and parcel of what we do at PRIME, and they really enable us to achieve our vision and mission. As I mentioned, we have 9 working groups. These are working groups that are comprised of international academics. They're networks that transform management education by focusing on an issue area in the SDG arena. So we have working groups on anti-corruption, we have working groups on business and human rights, business for peace, of course, gender equality, the sustainability mindset, and sustainable finance. These working groups operate through different initiatives and activities, webinars, as we have here today, are a wonderful opportunity really to bring academics around the table, but also practitioners, and to raise awareness on these issues in order to transform management education. But that's enough about our PRIME and our working groups, because I want to turn over the virtual microphone, or turn it back to Christina, so she can introduce our distinguished panelists today and the topic for the discussion, which I know you all are very excited about. Please do not hesitate, as I mentioned, to send me questions. I'll put my email in the chat, or you can of course send an email to our general email, which I will also provide in the chat. So Christina, back over to you. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Louisa. If I can go to my website or my computer to share my website so that I can show you our working groups page, where you can see more about us and our members and our activities. So our working group was founded in 2014 by two academics, Robert McNulty, who was previously at Bentley College, and John Katos, who was and is still affiliated with the American University in Sharjah, and actually will present his research in December to our working group. So we'll also be sharing the link to that webinar with everyone in the near future. On our website, you can see more about who we are, our activities. Here we have a section on media, where you can see the recordings of previous webinars. The one today is being recorded and will be added to our site within a week's time. And then we also have an online repository of publications that are focused on the interdisciplinary aspects of the Business for Peace field. Maybe just lastly mention that we are a working group that is comprised of academics. However, we are very open to our colleagues within the private sector, within the policy community, government, and certainly civil society to join our activities. Our main focus is furthering the discussion and scholarly research and knowledge on business contributions that often determine whether instability and fragility will lead to durable peace, or the complete opposite in many situations, instigate tensions and contribute to violence or armed conflict. So with that, if I could stop sharing my screen and move over to today's topic, which is exploring the intersectionality of business, peace building, and human rights. Our guest speakers today, as I mentioned, are colleagues from the U.S. Institute for Peace, Dr. Elie Abouaoun, who is the program director for the Middle East and North Africa, and Mr. Nate Wilson, who is the country director for Libya, will provide an overview of the topic and will, of course, present opportunities and challenges to contributions that the business community or private sector can make with regards to the MENA region and Libya more specifically. For time's sake, I will share the links to their full bios in the chat function. We thought that may be just maybe a better way of sharing their professional backgrounds. They come with many years of experience, and I'm very happy to have them join us today. If I could turn over to Elie to begin, Dr. Abouaoun, if you could please present, and then we'll share the virtual microphone with Nate before moving on to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Christina. And first of all, hello everyone. And I'd like to thank you and Louisa for your efforts in organizing this event. So as you said, I'm the director of the MENA programs at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And just a quick introduction about the Institute. So the Institute is an independent, federally funded institute established by the U.S. Congress in 1984. And our mandate is to work on preventing and mitigating violent conflicts. We work in several countries in the world. our portfolio, the team in which me, Nate, and others work is the MENA team. So we cover conflicts in different parts of the MENA. We have in-country programs in Libya and Tunisia and Iraq, and we have remotely managed programs in Yemen, Syria, and Egypt on top of the other 3 countries, and Lebanon right now. Anyway, it's my pleasure to be here with you, and this angle or this topic is very important to me, not only because of my work with USIP, but because also of my previous involvement with the Arab Human Rights Fund and with other international networks and regional networks working on the issue. So let me first say that, you know, the idea that there is a nexus between the private sector, peace building, and human rights is slowly emerging. That's right, but it is emerging and it's gaining more traction, especially in the region, which hopefully is a good sign, especially given the many conflicts that the region is going through right now. I'd like to, so my presentation will be about the challenges of the private sector in general, or the challenges of why the private sector is not doing enough in the field of peace building and human rights in general. And then my colleague Nate will take us for a deeper dive into the Libya case specifically. First of all, before we get into the private sector itself, it's important to note that in the MENA region, the concept of the social contract is problematic. It is problematic because for many reasons, but you know, the traditional definition of a social contract, which is when a citizen, you know, agrees to delegate the right to be governed to an authority, to a state, in return for welfare and prosperity and safety and protection. You know, this equation is really flawed in the region. And it's been now hundreds of years that communities and individuals live in the region outside of this framework, whereby we authorize another entity, which is called the state in this case, to govern us in return for safety, prosperity, protection, etc. So we are operating, and we're asking the private sector to operate in a region where the concept of a social contract does not really exist as we know it. There are many reasons to this. I think it's beyond the scope of this event. We can discuss it maybe in future events, but this is the fact today. As a consequence of this broken social contract, we've seen how you know, people operating the corporate sector in the region are also ignoring their obligations when it comes to, for example, protection the individual rights of the workers or the collective rights of the communities in which they're operating. In any case, in similar cases, the state should have a role in regulating this, but in the case of the MENA, it's not happening because of the weak law enforcement and the weak rule of law. The whole challenge behind the concept of rule of law in the region. So some characteristics about the context again in the MENA region. So first of all, the private sector is not really subject, or is not being held to accountability as we know it in other places of the world, for reasons that have to do with the infiltration by, or the fluidity between the political establishment and the corporate sector. So for this reason, the holding the private sector accountable by the state institutions is very difficult, is very challenging. And another reason is the fact that the public opinion itself is not really aware of the limitations of the private sector. So we have an issue of awareness at the level of the communities, at the grassroots level, So we've seen communities accepting practices that would not be accepted in other places. And we have the issue of the rule of law / the fluidity between the political establishment and the corporate sector. This is leading to many problems, as I mentioned before, that can be seen at the individual level, at the rights of the workers or individual citizen, and at the collective levels, at the community level. Now, another aspect of the problem is how the corporate social responsibility concept is understood in the region. In practice, I mean, no matter how people talk nicely about their CSR commitments or etc., but in practice, the majority of the CSR funding or resources are still going to charity projects, charity initiatives. And again, this has, there are many reasons why we're seeing most of the CSR money going to charity. One of them is that most of the countries in the region are not consolidated democracies, I would say. So some of them are absolute monarchies, authoritarian regimes, in some cases dictatorships. So it's not easy for the corporate sector to be involved in supporting initiatives that are not very safe from a political point of view. And the safest from this political point of view is to work on charity initiatives. So this is one layer. The other layer of the problem is also the understanding of what is a social responsibility of a company. So again, we have a legal impediment or a contextual impediment, if I want to call it, political context-related impediment, but there's also an awareness aspect to this. So the definition of a social responsibility is not as elaborate as it should be, this stems from the overall understanding that the private sector is above accountability and above, having any kind of responsibility. There are opportunities for the private sector in the region to contribute to peace and stability, or taking note of the challenges that I mentioned before. I think that the private sector has an interest, actually, not only an obligation. They have an interest in contributing to stability. Obviously, stability means, in general, more business and better business for the private sector. So one way of doing it is to contribute or to provide prospects for upward social mobility for young professionals. Most of in most of the countries in the MENA, one of the main issues that young people complain about is the lack or the absence of social mobility. And this issue, if you really spend time and discuss with the youngsters, the youth in the region, you will realize that this issue is even more important than their own personal freedoms and political rights and civil rights, etc. It's people really want to see how they can climb the social ladder, and in many cases in the region, there are no prospects for this. So the private sector can actually play a role in providing opportunities for this, for the youngsters for upward social mobility, and by doing this, the private sector will be contributing to more stability and more harmony, also social cohesion as well. The other opportunity that the private sector has in the region is to embrace or to adopt conflict-sensitive approaches in their business models at every level. We've seen, there are several examples, but we've seen how corporations operating in the region sometimes, knowingly or unknowingly, they enrich bad actors. So they do business with bad actors, whether terrorists or corrupt people, or even the way they do the business, or for example, the way they choose their vendors or they hire people, actually contributes to divisions, inequality, and fragility. So I think the private sector has an interest in revisiting these practices and making sure that they exercise, a minimum of due diligence internally to make sure that their operations are not contributing to inequality, fragility, or even terrorism in some cases. And the case of Lafarge in northeastern Syria is, is a very, very famous one by now. Again, one thing that can also be thought about is the do no harm principle. So for now, I think there is a very, very restrictive definition of what is the do no harm principle in the corporate sector in the MENA. And I can see that there is a discrepancy between how this principle is defined and practiced in the region versus how it is defined and practiced in other parts of the world. So better than having this come through, laws or legislations or whatever, I think the private sector can already start an internal discussion about how to elaborate or improve the definition of the do no harm principle and how to put it in practice. By upholding human rights standards and being conflict sensitive, I think the private sector not only contributes to localized stability or social cohesion, but they can also help strengthen the legitimacy of the state, which will have eventually positive implications on the overall environment in which these corporations are working. So it doesn't only work or the benefits will not only be seen between the private sector and the communities, but it will also have implications on the state and how the state is perceived. So it's essentially, it will help improve the public trust in general. One more thing where I can see a lot of opportunities for the private sector is to dedicate some resources and time on the education sector, education sector, whether private or public. I think that one of the issues that we're facing in the region is the fact that the human capital is not adapted to the needs. So there is a skills gap in the region, and because of this skill gap and because of other factors, of course, the human capital is trying to leave the region. So we have a very, very intense brain drain that is happening at this stage. If you take the examples of Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, most of the countries are Jordan. Most of the countries are seeing their human capital, being eroded with time. And one of the reasons, as I said, is the skills gap. And I can definitely see opportunities for the private sector to address this issue. So it's not only a wage gap, there's also a skills gap. Not everyone is leaving because there are higher salaries in other countries, but some people are leaving actually because they feel that they have better career perspectives that include, of course, the financial aspect, but it includes also their own career development and knowledge and expertise. One opportunity also for the private sector currently is the post-COVID period. So now, as most countries are seeing some improvements in terms of the pandemic, I think the governments in the region are under pressure to provide better social safety nets, stimulus packages, etc. So this is an opportunity for the private sector to step in and to create more bondings with the people, to improve the perception of the private sector, and to enhance the whole avenue of public-private partnerships, especially in countries where the government or the public sector does not have the resources to rebuild or to renovate the infrastructure or to fund other programs. So the PPP is an opportunity that should not be missed, I guess, by the private sector. So in summary, what I'm trying to convey here is that first of all, the region is specific anyway when it comes to why how the private sector is perceived and what are the challenges of holding the private sector accountable in some cases. But I also identified few avenues that the private sector can use to actually contribute to stability, prosperity, and social cohesion in general. So I'll stop here. I would like to thank you for your attention and turn it over to my colleague Nate, who, as I said before, will focus on the case of Libya. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Elie. And thank you, Louisa and Christina, for this opportunity and for the opportunity to speak with everyone in the audience. My name is Nate Wilson. I'm the Libya country manager for U.S. Institute of Peace. And the truth is that Libya needs as many stakeholders pulling in the direction of peace for the country as possible in order for it to pull itself out of the conflict cycle that it finds itself in. What's at stake here are Libyan lives, regional stability, and enormous opportunity in a country with abundant resources in and outside of the energy sector. Private businesses can be very important stakeholders in these efforts and can contribute to extending stability to areas outside of the capital of Tripoli, such as Libya's south, called the Fezzan, where we as USIP have worked since 2017. The social contract that Elie mentioned is a very good entry point to talking about Libya today because it's in desperate need of a new one, one where the role of government and the role of private business is better clarified and what Libyans can expect from each of those sectors. Due to Libyan politics being in flux, the current transition period is a perfect time to forge a new social contract that works for the citizen and the state. Unfortunately, it's also a time where individuals, businesses, and politicians too often try to get away with what they can because rule of law is weak and relationships in all different sectors, economic, cultural, political, military, are fluid. So I'll give a quick overview of Libya, identify just a few challenges because I think that we could spend all day on that and they've been explained elsewhere, and then talk about some of the opportunities. So in terms of a quick overview of Libya, the public sector still dominates the health, education, social services, and utility sectors, as well as smaller sectors such as the financial services and telecommunications. But private companies are growing. Up-to-date data on the size and the scale of both the formal and informal private sector in Libya is lacking. However, based on a recent UNDP study, major private sector industries include manufacturing, construction, and real estate, as well as consumer goods, retail, and small businesses providing other services. But Libya at its core is a rentier state. Oil sales account for its only significant source of revenue, earning $22.5 billion in 2019, for example. In a country with 6.9 million people, this is very significant. And moreover, 48% of Libyans are under 24 years old, and it has an astounding 49% unemployment rate. The southern part of Libya, the Fezzan, as mentioned, is marginalized economic and politically. Despite major sources of oil being located there, it does not see the concordant benefits of development or regularized inclusion in national politics and decision-making. This in turn contributes to people in Fezzan turning to illicit sources of livelihoods, including smuggling, regular goods, and illegal items, and even people across borders. So due in part to these structural realities, youth in Fezzan often feel without a voice and that their opportunities lie elsewhere, a brain drain, as Elie pointed to. But they've also formed protest movements, such as the Fezzan Anger Movement a couple of years ago, which shut down an oil field at one point, and anecdotally, they have moved out of Fezzan at high rates, as mentioned. So in terms of Libya's challenges, it has quite a few, but I want to highlight a few that affect the social contract. The first one is legislative drifting, is what I call it. Any legislative reforms related to the private sector have essentially been put on hold since the revolution in 2011, and in particular since 2014. The government alone essentially is looked to for provision and the legislative framework does not encourage the private sector. It is not hospitable to foreign investment, especially for those not connected to big international business interests. And this framework remained in place after the revolution. The recent economic crisis, however, which included a lack of liquidity in the banks and other crises, forced people into small and medium-sized businesses. However, these small entrepreneurs cannot access resources or capital because of the legal framework. Big business, for example, in the import-export businesses, have allies in government as well as access to resources. This unfair system, which has a high degree of corruption and use of connections through tribal, regional, and other types of connections, it contributes to inequality and ultimately the fragility of the country. Second challenge I'll mention is the nature of the conflict. The conflict is fundamentally over resources. And this relates directly to the economy, the relationship between citizen and government to business relations. In Libya, the resources are vast. Libya has the largest known oil reserves in Africa. Furthermore, ad hoc governmental decisions without clear criteria don't help stability over the long term. For example, the current interim prime minister has given youth grants for marriage ceremonies. In another example, Libya's legislative body, the House of Representatives, has meanwhile responded with its own subsidies of approximately $11,000 US to each Libyan family. These moves will come and go, but these decisions are made in the context of a lead up to elections and, more importantly, contributes to defining the role of government vis-a-vis citizens. It sets expectations that if they are not met, can have severe repercussions for stability. Another challenge is geographic divides. So Libya's south and indeed parts of the east have generally been an afterthought as the controls over Libya's economic life remain in the capital, especially in the form of the National Oil Corporation and the Libyan Central Bank. Moving on to opportunities. First, one is to capitalize, pun intended, on Libya's history, during which Gaddafi demonized the private sector. Using this latent mistrust to place appropriate guardrails on what the private sector can and cannot do to benefit Libyan citizens could be beneficial. This is especially important in the context of upholding human rights standards, both of individuals as well as communities. For example, communities living nearby energy sector developments who currently do not benefit from these projects, like in the Fazan, and indeed sometimes face environmental degradation and other negative effects. This right sizing could result in a situation where the private sector is rightfully held accountable and help to correct one of the problems that Elie mentioned is present in the region. Second opportunity, a forthcoming report that I co-authored shows that most youth in the Fazan in particular favor solutions that do not include civil resistance tactics like shuttering oil fields. Youth demands for greater economic, political, and societal opportunities should benefit from a general preference for peaceful approaches to problem solving that exist in this region. This can and should be encouraged. Third, taking a conflict-sensitive approach is good for business in the long run. It supports state legitimacy through upholding human rights as well as supporting stability. On a more tactical level, it can be good for positive brand recognition in a country like Libya, where word travels fast. Moreover, in the short run, it can help businesses avoid contributing to human rights abuses by shedding light on supply chains that in Libya are quite opaque. At USIP, we've seen how conflict sensitivity in the development sector works in practice, with conflict analysis being the first step towards identifying the problems that are at different levels of society, both root causes and their manifestations, and then designing programming that addresses these problems. For example, in working with UNDP in Libya South, we, along with local partners, identified drivers of conflict and made recommendations to UNDP about what types of projects could help not only do no harm, but could bring communities together that otherwise might be in conflict with each other. In another example, USIP's strategic partnership with the World Food Program, along with local partners, worked to open the Ubari Market in Green Space just last month, which was a direct outcome of USIP peace dialogues. This area in a strategic city, which is located near Libya's largest oil field and on smuggling routes, will build social cohesion between tribes as they reconcile after a 2014 to 2017 conflict by fostering economic integration and positive interaction. So aspects of this conflict-sensitive approach can be applied to private sector initiatives. CSR strategies can be transformed and implemented in a given context after involving communities, including women and youth, in dialogues. Another opportunity is that Libyan authorities and employers can ensure that expectations of what the private sector can deliver are right-sized and realistic. As a group or an organization called Tatweer that encourages entrepreneurship in Libya noted in one of their recent reports, quote, Libyan job seekers expect to receive contracts, social security, and pensions from their employers. However, only around a third of private sector companies provide these incentives. This can actually cause significant grievances, which could drive down not only productivity, but also stability. I would also argue that Libya could try out new models of working in the region, such as worker-owned companies. This can be one way to help incentivize the private sector to grow and inculcate a dignity-based business model that protects the rights of workers. Finally, women, not to be forgotten, should be at the heart of any efforts that want to use business to promote peace. There's a new paper out called Women, Peace and Security Guidance for Business, which Christina contributed to. And it explores this topic in the context of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and the UN Global Compact. One of the money quotes that I saw in there, one of the many money quotes, is investing in the Women, Peace and Security Agenda can not only provide the foundation for accelerated social and economic development, but also drive business advantages. It makes business sense to put women's interests at the core of business models and practices. Sustainable and stable communities, and by extension, business environments, can only exist if the fundamental rights of more than half of the world's population are protected and respected by all stakeholders. This is especially true in Libya. I'll leave it at that for now and turn it back to you, Christina. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Elie and Nate, for sharing your thoughts and telling us a little bit more about your experience in the MENA and Libya in particular. For those who have questions or have comments, please select the raise hand button, introduce yourself, and please share your professional affiliation. The first person that we have up is Mr. Nabil. If you could please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for this potential. My name is Dr. Nabil Al-Tarbaghi. I am from Benghazi, Libya. I am from the second generation of business in Libya. Our group is named Al-Tarbaghi Group, one of the oldest business group in Libya. At the same time, I am in politics. I am represented Barka Elite Party and social society in Libya, Barqa identity and history in Libya. Thank you for this invitation, and this is a very interesting subject because it's talking about Libya and talking about the status of how the private can be part of this. I'm thankful Dr. Nitz, which is very, what he say, it's amazing. First time I know, I am from Benghazi, I know all this. I don't know about that. First time I became aware what Mr. Nitz have been done. Let us to, from our side, the problem in Libya is complication, more than that. The complication of Libya, when we're talking about private sector, we are here in Libya, most of the private sector owned by government. That's the main problem in Libya. As a private identity, who are owned by private sectors, the government against them in Libya. They don't give them a chance. Okay, they are scaling them slowly. If you go for banking institutions or you go for any firms, they don't give you a chance. We forced in 1994 move our business from Libya to UAE. Why? Because the government don't give the chance to us as a private to grow in Libya. For that, when we are talking about private sector in Libya, we are not talking about local private sector. We are talking about foreign private sector or government private sectors. And this is the main problem in Libya. The Libyan people, majority is employee of government. Libya rate Libya total population is around 7 million people. More than 2.3 million people working in government. Why? Because government don't like to give them the job. Government prefer to give the job to them, to the government company, or will be given to foreign company. This is one part. The second part of Libya, he mentioned about Fazan. We have a regional problem. Libya is based in 3 regions. One of them is Barqa, where I am. We don't see the governments act in Barqa region at all, nothing. The oil resource of Libya and water resource of Libya coming from Barqa, but there is no government there. That's why the war had been started in 2014. If we don't focus to this problem seriously and let people involved in the business, fundamental people will be found that area grow, because there is two classes in Libya. The normal people who are small private sectors or government employee, or the other people who are working for high-rank government or company. Okay, there is no fair balance. And the wages also in Libya is not fair. We can see the wages in Libya for normal people, it's equal to maybe $100. People working in the governments, the wages of them can be reached maybe $5,000. This is the main problem in Libya. We need to move people to private sectors to be busy in that one. If this happened, this move is not happened. When I heard about this session, I was being very happy to hear something, but I can see we are still same problem. We are not passing this problem. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nabil. Thank you. Nate or Elie, if you have any kind of remarks on that. Of course, there's also a difference between the national legislation or lack of national legislation that encourages private sector development, especially inclusive private sector development in Libya. And also when compared to the local business community and how the local business community is surviving, much of which is on the informal side of the economy. But yeah, Nate or Elie, do you have any comments or would you like to respond to that? Thank you very much. And then we have another question right up after that.
Just a quick response. Thank you for the comments. I mean, I think, I focus my comments on Libya South because USIP has been working there quite a bit. It's a region of the country that I know well, but your point is well taken, Nabil, about there being 3 very separate regions. And, you know, the point that I was trying to make about centralization of power in Libya, in Tripoli, I should say, is a very crucial one, and, you know, is one of the, you know, it is a driver of conflict because there's no agreement between the three regions about the proper balance of decentralization. And so I'm glad that we had somebody from the East to articulate some of the points of view from that region. Thank you.
We have another participant who would like to ask a question or has a comment. Mr. Khaled, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you. I'm Khaled Al-Jazwi, Director of International Cooperation Office at the National Economic Development Board. We have the chance to work with the USAP in some projects. And thank you for introducing this specific topic, which I believe it's not only concern a certain place, even in South or West, it's covering all Libya. And my comment or my intersection is about some ideas or some ideas to cover or to develop a rule of or a policy concerning a private sector. Some of them already mentioned by Elie and Nate, but I'd like also to enumerate them in one list. So first of it is to assess and update the current commercial legislation. We work on something like that with ABA, and I think we can develop more assessment or evaluation of the current commercial legislation in this regard. Also to deal with the shadow economy, which is the informal economy mentioned by Nate. Diversification is also is a must now, as we all know, Libya has many potential and different resources, so we can make benefit of it, a part of the oil. Knowledge transfer and digital transaction is a trend now, and especially in the COVID crisis, we found that some of private sectors have the lead in this field, and to focus more on the capacity building and labor market to make a link between the capacity building and labor market to ensure that certain skills are maintained. Also to review the subsidiary policies, which no one now benefits from it exactly. What else here? It's the social protection policy to deal with the crisis. As mentioned by Elie, the social network, we have to develop an accurate one and to address the idea of social responsibility and governance in the private sector. Some of the companies are already doing this social responsibility, but the main idea is not shared by other companies. So we have to focus more in this and to encourage other companies to do the rules in the society. Also, the B4P is the most trending now especially in our current time. And at the end, I suggest to develop a policy paper on developing the private sector, so we can use it to help or to support the government to move forward to the private sector. And that's it. I'm over.
Thank you, Khaled. Maybe, yeah, Nate, if you would like to respond, do you have any points that you'd like to pick up on?
Just two. I think that, so I'm glad that Khalid is here in the first place. The NESDB is a governmental entity that should be more well known. Not only because of the role that it plays in bringing together different Libyan and international stakeholders for policy discussions, but because of the able people there, like Khalid himself. But I'm glad he mentioned diversification in particular. I think that that's a really good point, and it's something that I had in my parking lot here because that really is a big opportunity in Libya to move away from just having a focus on the energy sector, and can really be a transformative type of policy decision. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to highlight that part. I think that that's really key. But I'll turn it over back to you or Elie if you have other additional points.
Nothing from my side, thank you.
Maybe I could ask a question about, you mentioned about the need to renew the social contract and maybe how business potentially may help shaping that new contract. I mean, from your perspectives, working on peace building, conflict prevention, and so forth. I mean, how would that look at the local level in Libya, from what your work has been?
Well, I mean, in this specific issue, what applies to Libya mostly applies to other places in the region, is that first of all, what needs to be really worked on is to make sure that the local communities look at the state as a provider of safety and prosperity. So far, the relationship between the citizen and the state is a relationship that is tainted by hostility more than acceptability or a mutual gain, if I want to put it this way. So, and this is where, in my presentation, I did say that the private sector can actually help in this specific issue, is that they can bridge the gap between the local communities and the state in general, the concept of the state. Here, we're not talking about the state as, people representing specific institutions. We're talking about the concept of the state itself, that is seen as a controller, that is seen as a monitor, not as a provider of safety, and prosperity. So, and obviously this is a transformational effort. It's not something that can be done in the scope of 1 or 2 years. And I don't see one entity, whether local or international, being able to create this shift in the perception. So it requires a multilateral effort at different levels, long-term, etc. But I think there is an opportunity now, with the very low level of public trust that we're seeing everywhere, and with the negative perception of everything that is related to establishment. If you look at the outcomes of the elections in Tunisia in 2019, in Iraq this week, if you follow the politics in Lebanon, you can definitely see that the whole paradigm is shifting about what is the establishment capable of, how is it perceived by the local population, and where the public opinion is going in general. So there is an opportunity now to start working on changing these concepts from what they are today to becoming a bit more conducive to correct, or I would say correcting, but redefining the social contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Elie. We have one last question or comment from Siraj. I'm very happy to see you on the call.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm sorry I joined late and I also had to dip out for a bit. I've learned so much about your work recently, and it's been really fascinating to hear both of you speak today as well. My question also echoes, I think, some of what Elie was saying about to what extent do private actors who act in the public sphere, and by acting in the public sphere, I mean those who perhaps are exploiting natural resources in certain regions? To what extent are they aware of their responsibilities in terms of the exploitation and sharing of natural resources, in the sense that this is the wealth of the state? And there, I'm not talking about the type of state you were talking about, Elie, but the state as in the people who and the constituencies that make up the state. So the people, the sovereign owners of the land. And so when private actors are exploiting natural resources, to what extent do they feel that they have a responsibility to local populations in terms of sharing and distribution of that wealth, the fair usage of it? You've mentioned the no harm principle. That's one aspect. But it also, the more and more we're seeing these transitional states develop, we're seeing that a lot of it deals with not only the issue of power sharing, which is an entirely different topic, but also the sharing of the resources of the state. And where you have weak legal and constitutional frameworks to regulate the use and exploitation of those resources, and that doesn't then feed back into the local societies, that really hampers the chances for peace building, I think, and also it heightens the risk for more conflict outside of the legal and political process, and therefore it stunts the transition in a way. And so my question is, and you've mentioned the issue of coordination a lot. How is a political approach to this more conducive, or is there a more sustained legal approach that is necessary in terms of regulation of private actors who are also acting in the public sphere? And I'm thinking here also of regulations of how officials who are elected officials or appointed officials, to what extent they're allowed to engage in private enterprise, for example, because they are obviously in a position of authority and influence, and to what extent that provides for a fair competition. Sorry for the convoluted question.
And Siraj, sorry, Nate, before you jump in, can you, Siraj, we know who you are, but for those other folks, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, Siraj Khan. I head the projects in the Middle East and North Africa for the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law in Germany. Thank you. And then maybe Nate and Elie, in response to that, could I ask you all to maybe just include a few remarks for your closing remarks, since we're already just about at the full hour.
Sure, I'll just make a very brief comment, and I think that that's actually a fantastic question. It is, I wouldn't say convoluted, it's complex, that's for sure. To pick up on one part of it, do private sector actors feel a responsibility to the people and the state in which they are exploiting some of these resources? Anecdotally, I think that there is not they don't feel an overt responsibility, but they also don't. So it's kind of a lack of understanding and a lack of being able to see where those opportunities are. So that's why I think that sometimes they just kind of go forward with what they know. So what I think could be one step, obviously, strengthening the constitutional framework and legislative framework is really important. But I think you can also have a bottom-up dialogue between the different stakeholders, because what I've seen in the examples that I gave about working with World Food Program, and there are other efforts in Libya to bring together humanitarian development and peace building actors. The definitional issues are very real. And finding the convergence of interests is very difficult, and it takes a lot of time, but it's possible. And so I think that having that bottom up with hopefully a top down is something that can help to contribute to having a better understanding of the right balance there. And then just as a closing, I think. Libya has a ton of challenges. It's a fascinating state, but there's a lot of opportunity there, not just for making money as businesses, are meant to do, but also for contributing to peace building in really unique ways that, you know, really take head on some of the problems that are present in the region that Elie pointed to and that we all know about. And thanks again, Christina and Louisa. Elie?
Yeah, thank you, Nate. So also to answer, you know, one specific aspect of your question, Siraj, is the level of awareness in general is very low, but I can see that it's improving in general in the region. Even at the individual level, the level of awareness is low. You know, even the way we use our, you know, natural resources in our daily life as citizens, as individuals, the level of awareness is low, and we feel, I mean, the perception in general, because of the tweaked relationship between the citizen and the state, the resources of the state are always seen as a spoil that needs to be taken, whatever is, you know, at any cost. So, and one recent example is a debate in Lebanon about how the huge financial deficit is to be covered. And many people, including very, you know, accomplished professionals, are suggesting that the state should sell its assets and cover the deficit in a very, very natural, you know, way, as if it was a good solution. So no one is thinking about the future. For the last 30 years, we dilapidated funds, we caused a huge deficit, and now the state will sell all its assets to cover the deficit. We don't care about the next generation. So, and if you have this at the community level, then definitely most of the businesses, you know, at least at the national level, will be having the same issue. But again, I see that there are improvements, and here I want to, and as a closing remark, I would like to emphasize the importance of international instruments in, you know, providing the whole carrot and stick approach with the private sector and with the governments in general is very useful. I've seen a lot of companies in the region having to change their, you know, practices, their behavior, etc., because they wanted to join the UN Global Compact, or they wanted to be seen as, you know, riding the wave of what's happening at the international level, because, I mean, their assumptions that this will help them in their sales and marketing and branding, etc. So the international instruments are a very important factor coming in to help whoever is working in the region on these issues to, you know, in their efforts. I'd like to thank Christina and Louisa again. We are very happy at USIP that we're contributing to raising the visibility of this issue. I personally know that it's a very important one, but I know that not many people share this opinion in the region. So I'm glad that we're contributing to highlighting how important it is. And we're looking forward to our other discussions with Christina and Louisa and many others. Stay tuned, because more initiatives will be coming your way on this topic. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Louisa.
Yes, thank you so much, Elie and Nate, for taking the time to share your insights on working in the Middle East and North Africa and Libya in particular with us. For those who are interested in learning more, even more about their work, please check out the USIP website. Louisa earlier shared the PRIME website, so you can learn more about the other working groups, our sister working groups. As Louisa mentioned, we have working groups on business and human rights, business and gender equality, and climate change, the environment, poverty eradication, anti-corruption, and so forth. And then also please check our website to learn more about this unique field of business for peace. Today's recording, as I mentioned, will be uploaded to our site sometime within the next week or so. And please do consider registering for our next webinar, which will focus on the nexus of business and the women, peace and security agenda. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, as Elie mentioned, this is a topic that is still not widely discussed. We still do not have, I believe, an adequate enough of scholarly research and knowledge on the topic. And so we really do need a concerted effort to really further along the discussion in terms of how business impacts peace or instigates social tension and actually continues to foster those sort of conflict dynamics. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and pardon for going over time.